So I'd like to really move now. I think obviously patient support is paramount in all rare disease, and particularly in these kind of isolating conditions like this. Pat, can you talk a little bit about the role of patient support groups play in terms of supporting individuals and the families living with CAD?
Um, One way is patients tend to be, as I mentioned before, scared. They also tend to, because of the isolation, fall into depression. Uh, we can provide that social interaction, even though it's online. Our Facebook group, Caddy Chatter, is very, very active, and most of the people in there that help the newcomers are pretty knowledgeable about CAD and what you can expect. And you're going to find somebody, probably more than one somebody, that has experienced exactly what you're talking about. So from that aspect, we also produce webinars with doctors and others that can give knowledge of CAD. And at the end of the webinars, we allow the patients to ask questions. And so there's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
We always go over time on these webinars because of the number of questions. And so I think that helps. It's the unknown that scares people. As Jorg said, after a while, you learn you're not going to die from this. You learn about the mechanism of action of why it causes this and why it causes that, and what and again, that goes back to just feeling included, that hey, I'm not the only one out here with this. I've got other people I can depend on and talk to and listen to, and
It sounds like
then
that front loading of that accurate information is really important to end that kind of fear at the outset. And Jorg, if I can come to you about sort of the challenges of supporting people. Now, you've talked quite a bit about that kind of the isolation, and you've both mentioned about exercise. I think, the not having the same opportunities. Is that a big part of supporting families, giving them advice on other ways to stay active and to help with that side of, because we all know that exercise makes us feel better, which can help with isolation and depression. Is that a part of the work that you do through your group, for example, Jorg?
Yes, absolutely. Pat, I'm so jealous of you because the Caddy Chatter or the Chatter Caddy group is so much more. It's so much more active compared to the German group, but it's a mentality thing. And I experienced that once you start getting to talk to the people, they don't view your remarks, they just start to chat with you, and then you start getting their reaction. And yeah, get out, talk to people who have the same issue, and they will help you. They are always so friendly and nice people around in the world. You just have to go out with the systems you've got at hand. Luckily, we have the digital systems nowadays that, yes, you can get help. Because coming back to what was said before, I had difficulties to find German language understandable explanations about cold agglutinin disease. The explanations I got were for doctors and for professors with their language, which I partly had to translate for myself to understand what's this all about. And I missed talking to patients like myself, and that made me open up a Facebook group in Germany as well.
So what do you think? I mean, I think that it sounds as though because of the very visual nature of it, that stigmas may be a reason that might stop people reaching out, perhaps to get advice or to have connections. So it makes peer groups like yours really, really important. You know, do you, as well as kind of digital connection, do you bring people together in any physical way? Is that something that either of you have done through your different organizations? Maybe Pat first, if I come to you.
We had planned when we started in 2020, and we had planned to have an event in 2021. Now, of course, it had to be in a warm place, and you know, not a lot of physical activity, but we were in the process of planning this, and then COVID hit. And so we pivoted very fast into the webinars, and we've done that since, and they've been very successful in the way they've been received, in the numbers of attendees and so forth. So it so far we've continued with that. We've talked about having an in-person event again. There is a disease called warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia, which you would think would be people can't go out and get warm, but that's not exactly how it works. But some of our people have both warm and cold together, and we have talked about participating in events with that group and just see how many CADs are willing to venture out and do an event like that.
What about in Germany, Jorg? Is there any appetite, do you think, to bring patients together, or is that kind of digital Facebook connection more appropriate for people in more of a safe space?
Yeah, it's a different mentality in Germany. Of course, I would love to meet people in person whom I've talked to and written to via various digital systems. But COVID came in between and stopped all this happening. Video conferences are happening via various platforms, and I am lucky to take and participate on this. So people started to get to know that, yes, there's a Facebook group as well in existence. And very recently, it started to get really more alive. Yeah, it can always get better, but it's gotten better over the last 6-7 months. So we are at the very beginning compared
Yeah.
to the US
And it's
system.
about building trust, isn't it? I think as people start to really recognize that this is a safe space and that the trust level goes up, then also the ability to share more freely comes out. You know, it's natural with any community that people come to it quite reserved, but you know, over time, I'm sure there'll be like Pat's group where it sounds like it's a very chatty forum and lots of insights. And you know, it just takes time, doesn't it, for people to feel they can be safe. So we've got loads of questions that have come in, which is great. So I want to make sure I've left time for those. But before we move on to questions, you know, if somebody's newly diagnosed and in that kind of initial fear phase that I think we've really acknowledged is kind of the first thing that may happen to people. Pat, where's the most reliable source of information? Where can they go to get that support and information, that first phase of post-diagnosis?
I'm probably a little prejudiced, but I would say our website, coldagglutinindisease.org, it has a lot of information. It also has a section for the newly diagnosed. We have a person who is an advocate for the newly diagnosed to help, you know, if they need someone to talk to. So and she is very encouraging on being an advocate for yourself. Don't just depend on listening and what you hear. Ask questions. Insist on getting the correct blood test. That kind of thing. and
can you provide
that's the way. I'm sorry.
No, so carry on.
That's the way we have to be. We have to be very firm in dealing with this, you know, as far as phlebotomist and because they haven't heard of it. One thing we are trying to do is educate physicians, and we've had two we put together with educational groups, we put together two doctor CME programs that hopefully a lot of the physicians might go to those. It's just, it's an educational thing. Yeah. It's both with patients and with the medical community. We are finding that today that there are more doctors that are aware of CAD.
I mean, that's reassuring, and I think we've got some questions around that, so it's really encouraging to hear that that's improving.
One of the things we have on our website is and it's not inclusive. So, I mean, we don't have everybody on there, but if a patient has a doctor that they like, and we ask that they put it on our website. And so we have a list of patient recommended physicians there in various, we're global. So it's both in Europe and Australia and in the US and Canada. So it again, not comprehensive, but as we're going along, we're finding there's more and more doctors that patients consider, I've got a good doctor.
Well, that's certainly encouraging. And Jörg, from a German-speaking perspective for families, where could we signpost families that might be German-speaking that want to access information?
The system in Germany is a bit different than in the USA. What you do as a patient in Germany, you contact your general practitioner, you go to your family doctor. He then goes to hematologists who happen to have training with various universities or rare disease centers, which we have. So universities, rare disease centers get educated. They are very well educated professors in Germany, but more or less centralized, the ones who really investigate this disease. But others know about it and they can tell you more. Going to a general website at the moment is not available. That's why I said I have my site, which is always open to questions, and I could.
Can you give us the handle for the listeners of your Facebook page so they know where to find you? We can pop that in the chat.
Yeah, I can. Cold agglutinin disease is Kälte-Agglutinin-Krankheit. Big
Maybe you can type it for us.
Yeah.
It's also a good time while you are typing that in the chat for us to also let listeners know that your second CAD patient day will be taking place virtually on Zoom on the 21st of October between 9:30 and 12:30. So again, Becky is going to put that in the link, the Zoom link for that. So if anyone wants to pop that in their diary, they can, which will be a German-speaking patient support session. So good to have that dropped into the chat. So we've got lots of questions. I want to try and get through some of these. I think the first one, Catherine, is going to come back to you. Somebody's asked here, is there a push for education to clinicians to ensure that the blood sample is handled properly?
Oh, absolutely. So, you know, anytime we hold any type of conferences or meetings or education sessions, we're stressing really the importance of diagnosis, and with that importance comes how to handle the blood specimens, not only, you know, the peripheral blood specimens, but you heard Pat mention a bone marrow examination, and it's important to handle that specimen warmly as well, so that again, we want accurate information to be available to the clinician who is performing the testing so that the patient can get quick and accurate diagnosis.
Right. Thank you. Actually, a few of these are going to be for you, Catherine. We've got another one here that says, how come symptoms can come out so heterogeneously in different patients? On one hand, color changes versus hemolysis. Yeah, is there an explanation for this, and what is behind the difference? And is there a tendency towards more external signs, blue skin, in later evolution of the disease? So quite a complex question, but if you can perhaps give an overview of that.
So there is an explanation, and it has to do with the quantity and the strength of the antibody. So different people's bodies produce different quantities, but they also produce antibodies that have different strengths. And some of those strengths have to do with the exact temperature at which the antibodies are most active. And so all of those things can come together, again, to make this a very unique disease in each individual patient. Think about these antibodies kind of like you think about people, and you can see our pictures, right? And so we're all people, but we're all very different in our hair color, our eye color, our face shape, our nose shape. And that's how antibodies are as well. And that's what gives the disease so many different characteristics in each individual patient.
Wonderful, thank you. Pat, you mentioned about having a lymphoma, and someone has asked the question here, is CAD always a lymphoma?
No.
Catherine, Pat, I'm not sure who wants it, but no. Okay.
Sorry. Go ahead.
You want to add to that, Catherine?
Yeah, so it's not always associated with a diagnosis of a lymphoma, but what we are learning and what we have come to accept is that CAD itself is associated with the presence of a very specific kind of lymphocytes within our bone marrow. And so when your doctor is diagnosing you, one of the things to look for is this specific kind of lymphocyte in the bone marrow, but also, as in Pat's case, to see whether or not the CAD may be associated with an underlying lymphoma, some of which are very slow growing, as Pat mentioned, and may never require therapy, but others may require some direct therapy at some point in time.
Thank you. There's another question actually that leads on from that, where someone has said for Professor Broom, when there's so much impact of CAD on patients, which is not resolved through therapeutic intervention, how can healthcare professionals better support patients holistically? Really good question.
It's a great question. And I think, from my perspective, what I like to think about in managing patients with these rare disorders, including CAD, is it's my job and my responsibility, first of all, to really listen, right? And to hear what are the impacts, because as we mentioned, they're going to be very different. And then we can try to really address either with medical intervention or with supportive measures, what can we do to help improve any of the symptoms that you may be having. There are some therapies out there that are available to potentially address either the agglutination or the hemolysis or both. And so I think really understanding what has the impact been on your particular patient and what is that patient's goals, right? What would they like to do? What kinds of side effects are they willing to potentially encounter from a therapy, et cetera? So I think it's really about forging a partnership. And, I think what Pat said about patient recommendations for physicians, I think as an advocate for yourself as a patient, if you don't feel like your clinician is hearing you or listening to you or really addressing your concerns, you can always, ask them, do you know a specialist in the area who is particularly interested in CAD that I might visit on an ad hoc basis, not maybe every visit, but intermittently, just to keep up. And also, you know, remembering that we're trying to learn about CAD all the time. And one of the ways that we do that is through clinical trials. And so going to a center where they may have clinical trials, some of which are interventional with medications, but others of which are just information gathering. We do have a world registry where we are just trying to gather information about symptoms, about how they're impacting patients' lives, so that we can take that information and try to really understand and learn how we can better help these patients.
Thank you so much. I am going to have the liberty of going a few minutes over because there are some really good questions here that I'd like to get to. So let's try and keep it brief, but I do think it's worth getting to these. Somebody's asked here, what would be something that you could share that would make a difference for when you're advocating for your care and diagnosis? And I think either to Pat or Jorg, what would be the thing that would make a difference in advocating for yourselves?
Yeah, cooperation with knowledgeable people who are willing to help me out with the technical details of the communication. I'm thinking of opening a website, but I need help and somebody's support who can reach out to me and help me. Communication support is one of the main issues here. So being aware, and I need help of others who are more knowledgeable about technical details.
Well, that's a wonderful call to action to put out to those listening, I think. So another couple of super quick questions. Can a correct diagnosis be done on a coagulated blood sample by heating it up? Probably for you, Professor Bloom.
Unfortunately not.
Okay.
So once that process takes place, a correct diagnosis cannot be obtained.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Someone's just asking about the German link. Yes, I think Becky's going to try and put that in the chat for you so you can get that. If not, we will certainly be sure to share that across our channels, but we'll try and get that up before the end of the session. Do the panel see a difference in how patients live with CAD depending on where they live? Pat, obviously you're working with lots of people internationally. Perhaps you can answer that one for us.
To some extent. We have, say in the US, we have the same problems of getting a diagnosis, having our blood handled correctly, that kind of thing. As I understand it, in Europe, the health system is such that it can be more difficult to, if you have a physician that is not listening, as Catherine said, the CAD brain, I just lost my, it does affect your brain. The physician, you know, if they're not listening and they're not willing to do the research to learn what they need to do for you as a patient, then change physicians. That's very difficult in Europe. As again, as I understand, we have several European patients that are in our CAD chatter, and they just use the translation tool in Facebook to understand, and we use it to understand what they're saying. So we hear from a lot of patients that are, it's just very, very hard for them to get the treatment that they need.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that. So one last question we've got here, possibly one for you, Catherine. Are there behaviors that can prolong the progression of the symptoms of the disease?
Sadly, no. It is a disease that really basically has a mind and a tenor of its own, and the production of the antibody is not dependent on any of your behavior. So, you know, not going outdoors or not drinking cold liquids or, you know, trying to avoid those things is really, unfortunately, not going to change how the disease is going to behave.
Wonderful. We've had one last comment that's come on that just says, Jorg is so great. Couldn't Jorg start a German-speaking branch of the CAD Foundation or Caddy Chatter in German speaking? So maybe that's a conversation to pick up afterwards.
I was thinking, just real quick, I was thinking that when he was saying that maybe we could talk and the US can help him start something and get it built.
Fantastic. Well, that's a wonderful
Germans.
outcome to something happen there. That'd be wonderful. Thank you all so much. I mean, it's really, I think a couple of things that really spoke out to me there was, and it takes us full circle back to something you said, Catherine, at the start about the low threshold for suspicion within HCPs. I think that's a really key thing here. And I think you kind of ended with it there, Pat, as well, about how important it is to have that appetite to look for what is really happening and that importance of listening. And I think also what I've certainly taken away from this is that, you know, the physical aspects of a disease are one thing, but actually the things like the guilt and the isolation and that kind of loneliness, and, you know, you talked about just being tired doing the dishwasher and things like that, they're often the things that people and healthcare professionals don't see. So it's why it's so important for these kind of sessions, because you just can't get that nuance without, you know, people like Jorg and Pat sharing that with us. So I greatly appreciate your candid, very open approach to telling that to us. And I think also, Catherine, obviously you've given a really good insight that's been really accessible in terms of understanding the science behind it also. Thank you all so much. Also a big thank you to our sponsor, Sanofi, for partnering and helping us bring this session to the listeners, and to our listeners for so many great questions. It's always great when we have to jam in a load of questions at the end. It makes it, you know, really wonderful from our perspective. So if anyone does have any more questions after the session, please do feel free. There'll be some contacts come up at the end. Reach out to us, and also please do connect with Pat and Jorg for any support if you're going through this at the moment. Big thank you to our panelists, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.